Welcome, Amanda, to the Dating Intentionally podcast. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm excited to be chatting with you today.
Yeah, I'm great. I'm really excited to talk today. And my first question for you is what are you being intentional about lately?
Oh, I love this question. Um, I'm really trying to be intentional about my social media usage. Oh, I'm really trying to, especially like I have a young daughter and I'm trying to be intentional about my time with her and putting down my phone and being present with her, but it's hard.
It is really hard. I mean, I would also love to be intentional about putting my phone down with like when watching TV, but we
Yes.
both are offenders of this. We're both scrolling while watching TV, and I don't think either of us care enough to it's bad. Yeah.
Well, it's hard because it's like I find too when I am trying not to scroll and then I'm married and when my husband's scrolling, then it like reminds you to pick up your phone and
Yes.
scroll and it just goes back and forth.
So what are you doing? Like, do you have like a timer for social media? Because I have one for Threads specifically, because I will just keep scrolling on Threads forever.
I do have a timer. I'm in a bad habit of falling asleep, like to my like in bed. Like I don't fall asleep reading or anything, like my phone. But my Kindle right now is like MIA, and I need to find it. So I've been reading
Okay.
on my phone. So I've been trying to make sure that I keep my phone on airplane mode
Okay, that's good. I like
and
that.
trying to like keep it on airplane mode, kind of like even if I'm on it at night when I'm on TV, like trying to keep it on airplane mode there and trying to not immediately go on
Yeah.
to social media when I open my eyes in the morning.
I appreciate you saying this because like even a therapist struggles with this. You know, if you're listening, like we all struggle with this.
Yes.
So, okay. Something you've been talking about lately on your podcast, which is called Nuance Needed, right?
It
Yeah,
is.
which I
Yes.
love, is doing less. And you've been
Mhm.
talking about doing less in terms of like kind of your whole life. Like you had this whole clip about doing less with like gut health. It's like if you're not even eating vegetables, why do you even care about your microbiome? Like,
Yes.
so how can you talk about how doing less could also apply to our relationships and dating?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been such a trend lately, I think, with social media and I want people to remember that often people who are telling us to do more are trying to like sell us something in a lot of ways. So even if it comes to dating with like being on, the common reframe I hear online about dating is if you want to be able to get married or find a long-term partner, you need to, right, like go on a certain amount of dates and it's just a math game. And I really wish we would talk about how it's also luck. Like, yes, there's like intentionality, there are things we can do, but as someone who's married, like I also am like, I also got lucky. And I wish we talked about that enough or more.
Agree.
But yeah, I think that so a couple things that come to my mind is not always is it a numbers game with dating. I think you can also be really clear about like for example, I'm sober and when I was dating, I was really clear and I was on apps. I was really clear that I told people on my profile that I didn't drink because I didn't want to waste my time with someone who wasn't going to be accepting of that because that was a core piece of who I am and
Mhm.
I think sometimes we want to cast as wide of a net as possible for things that we don't always check ourselves and think about whether we actually want to be with that person. And what a waste of
Right.
time to go on so many dates when you could date less with better people.
100%. I mean, it's really hard with dating with that specific approach because I think it's like the logical approach, but then the emotional is like,
Mhm.
but what if I'm missing out? Like, oh, I didn't
Yes.
go, but that means I'm not going to go on as many dates. And like, my friend is going on so many dates. Like, Talia went on 64 first dates in a year, which, by the
Yep.
way, I don't recommend people do. Like, I don't like just because I did that and
Yes.
it did lead me to my meeting my husband does not mean think people should do that.
Yeah.
Like, it's
And I
tough.
think that is the problem with social media is a lot of social media these days is like if I did this, you should do this too. And a lot of my work lately as a therapist is trying to like help people think about things more critically and helping people realize that just because someone did something and it worked for them, there could be a variety of reasons why that worked for that person. Or
Mhm.
like I know you've shared about how like you wanted more experience going on dates. So that's part of why you did that. But
Yeah.
if someone has a lot of experience, like, that's probably not the right
Yeah.
thing for them. So the nuance, like, matters, and the specific thing you're looking to get out of something also matters. But because of social media, and we just see, right, a trending topic or a trending clip, or if you want to meet your husband, do this, we don't actually think about whether the advice works for us.
What's a reframe or, like, just kind of a little tip you have for if you're in that mindset, you're scrolling on TikTok and Reels and you're, like, hearing all this advice, what's, like, a little lens we can have, like, a little filter for that?
Yeah, one of my favorite ones is this in alignment with my values? Because a lot of times someone who's sharing something, right, what they care about is sharing their story or maybe selling you something, like I've said, but is what they're selling you or is what they're saying in alignment with your values or even your goals, right? Like just because someone is really interested in, we'll use the example of going on a ton of dates, right? Doesn't mean your goal necessarily is to go on as many dates. Your goal
Mhm.
might be that you don't have very much time
Right.
and you, right, like your value might be time and you need to be really mindful of your time and not want to spend it that way. So I think that's one. The other one I think that people can think about is try to learn a little bit more about that person or where their advice is coming from and see if you are different or similar and try to add more context to that person's sort of story, and then you can kind of decide whether their advice actually works for you.
I love that you said that. That, like, really clicked for me because I think I do that naturally. Like, if
Yeah.
I do look into people, I'm like, "Oh, okay, like, this is their background," and I'm
Mhm.
not I don't think it's good or bad. It's just, okay, that's different. They
Yeah.
have a different vibe, like, they have different values. This is great advice, honestly. Another thing about social media and dating that I notice, I don't know if you've noticed this, is, like, sometimes it just feels like everyone's having a horrible time, which is
Mm.
part of why I started my podcast and
Yeah.
Instagram is because I was like, "Okay, I'm having fun. Why
Yeah.
what this is different." So when you're kind of scrolling and all the messages are like, "Dating sucks, online dating sucks,
Yeah.
there's no one out there," like, what do we do to pull ourselves out? Because is that reality, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a hard question to
Yeah.
answer because
I just wanna know what you
right?
think.
Like, yeah, no, I think it's a really great question, and I think I mean, I can tell you, like, the data that we know, right, is we know, like, men and women are differing more if we're talking about heterosexual relationships,
Mhm.
like, we know their values and their political beliefs are different, which I think is a challenge with dating. But I also think that there is an opportunity. Like, I think we sometimes forget, yes, online dating can suck, but I think it also can be interesting. And if you like, one thing that really worked for me that I try to talk to clients about sometimes too is it is also an opportunity to meet different people. And if we're only going into the date, right, with the expressed goal of I want to find a partner in this person and I want to know immediately, I think it's going to really limit you. Or even, maybe your goal could be to have fun, even if this person isn't someone that stays in your life forever. Like maybe you want to go
Mhm.
on a bunch of dates where you go try a bunch of new restaurants, and that's sort of the thing. And it's a way for you to explore the city. That can be, I think, the context that you date also really matters.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that it's when you're really extremely online or like whatever you wanna
Hmm.
call it, it is hard, I think. I know it affects me in my work when I'm, like, scrolling and I'm like, "Wow, everyone's having a horrible time online dating," which is, like, valid,
Yeah.
but it's like, where are the people who are not? Because I
Hmm.
know a lot of people are meeting people online, on the apps, are just like, are they just not as vocal about it?
Hmm.
Like, or is the algorithm just, like, playing up drama? Like, it's hard to know what's real.
It's definitely hard to know
Yeah.
what's real. I mean, I think the algorithms definitely highlight, right, like emotional reactions from us,
Yeah.
whether that's good or bad. But honestly, like rage bait gets more reactions than
It
anything
sucks.
else.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what's hard too is I think sometimes what I really wish people understood as a therapist is you can feel a way in one moment and then you can send that out into the world on social media, on Instagram or on threads or whatever. And then you can feel differently later. And I think sometimes we forget that this is like a moment of someone's life that they had this thought that online dating sucks. But
Right.
just because someone has a thought like that doesn't mean they 100% believe that online dating sucks, that there's no hope, that they're going to stop online dating even necessarily. So this is something interesting that I like wish people knew as a therapist, because I get the privilege of seeing how people change like week to week, day to day, even minute to minute in sessions. People
Right.
will be like,
It's so cool.
I'm leaving my husband. No, I'm going to stay, right? Like we can flip flop around about what we're thinking, especially as we're sort of exploring something that we're ambivalent about or not sure about. And the problem with social media is you don't get any of that context. You just see that one thing and you assume
Yeah.
that person always feels that way.
That's a great way to think about it. Like, this is just a fleeting, like, emotions are not static. They
Yeah.
are they
People
kind of
also
pass
like
through
reach
us.
out or tweet their intrusive thoughts, even, right? Like random thoughts. Like not
Yep.
everything you think is even real.
Amazing. That's so comforting. It's So what are some boundaries then, or, like, some ways we can kind of ground ourselves and, like, "Okay, like, I'm experiencing this feeling right now, then
Mhm.
what?"
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is to try to get off social media, to try to not, go down the rabbit hole. Because the hard thing about social media, we know too, is that the algorithm, especially, on TikTok, for example, it just kind of is like a hole that you go down deeper and deeper. And if you watch a video about someone saying how much they hate dating, you're going to continue to be served that. And it can make you feel like, oh, this is a trend. I'm seeing so much evidence. This must be
Right.
true. And I think trying to like pause, take a break, recenter yourself, maybe go outside. Like I do really believe like we all need to go touch grass and remembering what your values are. And just because someone else is having a certain experience that's different than yours doesn't mean that they're the same or that that is going to happen to you.
It's so important to remember that. I love that advice. So let's talk a little bit about comparison on social media, because this is
Yeah.
another part of it. And also just comparison in our lives, because I think especially in our 30s, it's like we're seeing our friends partner off, or like we see other people maybe who met our friends in college who met their person in orientation of college, which is like two people I know,
Yeah.
you know, and they're married now. So it's like, what are some ways we can kind of again balance that out, or just address the comparison trap?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's again like trying to remember what your strengths are, what is important to you. Because what I can also tell you as a therapist is some of those people that meet their significant other in orientation struggle a lot more in their relationship because they're totally different people now. And there's a lot to be said for being fully formed in your values, your thoughts, your beliefs, and meeting someone when your, brain is fully developed, compared to I see lots of people who maybe they're like the loves of each other's lives and they're not like ending the relationship, but they struggle more. And I think every relationship has pros and cons. There's no really obviously some are better than others for sure,
Mhm.
but a lot of what I see in terms of what makes someone fulfilled in a relationship is the willingness to have difficult conversations and the willingness to turn towards each other instead of against each other during hard times. And yes, it can be great to have shared history, but, I don't know, I can speak for myself. In college, like, I was a nightmare, and I'm so glad that, like, I didn't meet my husband in orientation because there would be a lot of baggage associated with it that probably he would always remember that I did certain things or said certain things that are not an issue in my relationship. And I'm sure you know,
Right.
even if I were old, the older you get also, the more you know yourself, and that is an advantage.
Yeah, I mean, so that's one, so you mentioned kind of one thing, just remembering that the grass isn't always greener. What are some other tools we can use to kind of break away from this negative comparison loop?
Yeah, I mean, I think also reminding yourself that we kind of touched on this, but just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean that is like a permanent state that you're going to be in. Your emotions are not always a clear, like, understanding of what's going on. I like to tell people a lot, your feelings are always valid, but what you do as a response to your feelings are not always valid.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
yeah.
I've not heard that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like you may feel lonely and like it's valid that you feel lonely, but like you yelling at someone else because they're in a relationship is not a
Right.
valid response. It's not a good response necessarily to how you feel. And we need to work on other ways that you can process that and work through that emotion.
This is a great topic. What's a sign that I might be doing something that's not the best way to handle the emotions I'm feeling? Like, if what how do I know that I'm
Yeah.
not responding the way that isn't great? You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of them is if you're hurting someone, not just like
Mhm.
physically, but if
Yeah.
you are in fights with people all the time, and you're constantly sort of like upset with them and sort of like dumping your emotions onto them, that is a sign that you might not be dealing with them appropriately.
Mhm.
A lot of times what I see too is people, um, are often afraid of their emotions. They don't know how to process them. They judge themselves for feeling their emotions, so they shove them down and they kind of shove them down and ignore them. And then a lot of times they explode in some way, whether it's anger, whether it's just like uncontrollable sadness, and that teaches them essentially that their emotions are scary, and it reinforces this belief that it's kind of like emotional procrastination, and you keep being
Mm.
stuck in like, well, last time, I felt angry, I yelled at someone, so I can't be angry, so I'm going to shove that down. When in reality,
It's
if
sad
we
to think
allowed
about.
ourselves and we, faced our emotions slowly, bit by bit, they wouldn't boil over like that. But we have to start practicing that and allowing ourselves to feel them.
I wanna move on to the next topic, but really quick, what's, like, a resource that someone could check out about learning where to start with that?
You could actually check out my book, although my book is geared more towards sobriety. A third of my book is essentially written on like 4 skills that I believe everyone needs to learn to be like a fully
Love it.
functioning independent adult. And I have a whole chapter on exactly how to process your emotions and exercises. My book is called Not Drinking Tonight.
Love it. Awesome. So another thing that you talk about is indecision, and I feel like
Yes.
a lot of people just don't talk about this enough,
Yeah.
because it's so interesting. So tell me a little bit about, like, why this is such an important topic, you think?
Yeah, I completely agree that people don't talk about being undecided. I think it's not popular because we all like to be like, it is vulnerable to feel unsure about something. It is vulnerable to
Yes.
question
Oh my
something.
gosh.
And we love, I think, especially on social media, we love being like, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. This is my, choice. This is what I do. And even in terms of career, dating, whatever it is, a lot of times it's just like not interesting to sort of be like, I don't know what I want, or I don't know what I believe, or things like that. We love decisiveness and people who are sure of things
Mhm.
because our brain really likes simplicity. We love things
Right.
to be in black and
Boxes.
white.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how this plays out in dating and relationships. What are some signs that someone might be staying in a relationship,
Hmm.
like, kind of out of fear of making a decision
Yeah.
rather than, like, actually wanting to be in it?
Yeah, totally. One of the big ones is cost sunk fallacy, which is essentially
Sunk
right.
cost.
Sunk cost, thank
Yeah,
you.
I was like, "Wait."
Cost sunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Which is essentially that someone has put a lot of time and energy into the relationship and they feel like, well, now it's too late for me to start over. I don't want to start over. I need to stay in this and make it work. And it's your brain that kind of tricks you into thinking that all the time you've invested is worth it enough that you should stay. Where in reality, one of my favorite questions to ask people who are trying to decide whether to stay or leave a relationship is, if you went on a date with this person today, would you choose them again?
Are you supposed to think about that knowing everything you know about them now?
Yeah, not in
Okay.
terms of right, because I think, like, not it's not perfect, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, like, there are things about them, but yeah, I think, like, especially in a partnership, like, would you marry them again?
Mm,
Would you enter this partnership with them
right.
again, knowing everything you know?
It's tough because, like, I can imagine someone kind of going through that exercise and being like, "Well, on paper, they're great," or like, "But my family likes them so much," and it's, like, all these
Mhm.
other external things. So how do you drill down into, like, the core of what is really aligned with you?
I mean, I think 2 of the things you said, if I were talking to a client who said that, I would say that those aren't about you.
Yeah.
Those are about your family.
Right,
And at
right.
the end of the day, right, like you're the one who has to live with them and be with them and all of that. And it's not the illusion that someone ever will be perfect for us. Like I really subscribe to the belief of life is really hard and life is going to be hard and present us with challenges. So who do we want to be with during that? Like one of my favorite quotes is like it's from someone who wrote this whole essay about it's called like you'll marry the wrong person. Have you seen that?
No, I have not.
I'll have to send it to you. It's an article
Okay.
called "You Will Marry the Wrong Person," and it essentially says that like you'll marry the wrong person because no one's perfect. We're all hard to live with. We all have our like issues, but it's like who do you want to? If you're going to marry the wrong person, which wrong person would you want? Do you want to marry?
Love it.
Because we're all going to have our stuff. So it's like which variety of difficulties would you like to have? Which annoying quirks? Everyone has an annoying quirk, but which one can you tolerate the most, for example?
Right. Yeah, that's I talk about that a lot, and I feel like there is like the voices online are always like, "But you're telling us to settle," and I'm like,
Yeah.
"There's a reality here that, like you're
Yeah.
saying, no one's perfect, and so if you wanna call that settling, sure, I call it accepting, but
Yes.
it's a little different, and also just, like, being realistic."
Yeah, like you're gonna set yourself up for failure. Like
Yeah.
if you like maybe there's like 0.1% of the population that like that has this soulmate perfect reality or perfect like situation, but for most people, we're hard to live with, they're hard to live with, and we have to figure out how to make it work. And even if that person is the perfect person for us, life is hard, and it's hard not to
Mhm.
turn against your partner when life is hard.
Totally. So back to the making decisions in dating, I feel like there is a level of guilt because if you are deciding to leave something, you will be
Mhm.
potentially probably hurting that person.
Yeah.
So what are some tips for dealing with that?
So, one thing I tell people is that often you already feel guilty before you've left. Like, you
Yeah.
already feel guilty if you're questioning and you're thinking about leaving.
Oh yeah.
And wouldn't you rather have the guilt be towards like working towards something? If you're right, like, wouldn't you rather, if you're going to bear this guilt, wouldn't you rather at least be able to walk away and start to rebuild a life?
Mhm.
Because I really believe also that the person that you're thinking about leaving also deserves to be with someone who doesn't want to leave them. And this is different than I'm mad at my partner, I'm frustrated at my partner, they're annoying, right? Like the regular, we're going to have thoughts
Mhm.
about like our partner's annoying and have thoughts. And some of us are more indecisive than others. Like when life gets bad for me, I fantasize about like running away in
Oh my
like
god,
all
same, same, same.
aspects.
Yep, yep. I have to
That doesn't,
catch myself
yeah,
in that
yeah,
spiral and be like, "No, do not make an escape plan. That's not
yeah.
the answer. Like, stop."
It's really fun when you have kids because you can't escape. But anyway, so I think we all have to know ourselves on that level, and that's not what I'm talking about, right? Compared to if you've thoughtfully considered it, I think waiting and delaying is only going to make the process more painful for both people because that person also deserves to be with someone who cares about them and isn't thinking about leaving them and stuff like that too. And often people think that they need to wait to do something until they don't feel guilty. Like a lot of people will
Mm.
tell me, I'll leave when I feel better, or I'll set this boundary when I stop feeling guilty, but I need to not feel guilty before I take action. And what I have to tell them is no, you're going to feel guilty regardless, but you can start taking action and you will, as you take action, start to feel better.
So true, and it is so much easier said than done.
Totally.
Yeah, yeah. So what are some ways to distinguish between, like, a gut feeling when you're making a decision
Mm,
versus anxiety-driven thoughts?
totally. So one of my favorite ways to think about this is a lot of times anxiety is right. Anxiety is an emotion and it is very urgent and it often has like physiological
It's a good
symptoms
reminder
that come
that,
with it.
anxiety is an emotion. Such a good reminder.
Yes. Yes. It's a lot of times it has physiological sensations associated with it. Your heart's racing, your hands are sweating, you can't take a deep breath, and it feels like you need to make a decision right now. It's often very time driven,
Right.
where a gut response, whether you call it your intuition, knowing, taking action from values, whatever, is a lot more patient. Because if you're sure about your decision, you can wait.
Mm.
Where anxiety wants you to take action right now before you calm down and change your mind. So if you feel like you can't wait and you have to do something right now, like sitting on it is a really good idea, because if it is the right decision, your decision isn't going to change. But if it is the wrong decision, your decision might
So
change.
how long should we wait? Like a day? Like, is it sleep on it? Is it like a week? Is it like until I talk to my therapist? Like, what? You know?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say definitely 24 hours for
Okay.
sure. But I would also say, like, until some of the anxiety is less palpable, until you
Oh,
feel
okay.
like it
It's
wear
settled.
off a little bit.
Right.
Because a
Okay.
lot of times we just can't think clearly through anxiety,
Yep.
just like you and I talked about. Like, if you're planning to leave and you're just, like running out the door, right? Like, that's the anxiety being like, get out now, now, now.
Yeah.
Where if it's the right decision for you, you can wait until the anxiety has passed and it won't then be clouding sort of your judgment.
I love that advice, and, it's really hard to wait,
Yes.
but it is definitely very effective. Okay, so another question that comes up a lot with, like, should I stay, should I go, or just, like, am I in the right relationship? It's
Mhm.
like, how do you know if you're feeling indecisive, is it a sign to work through something, or is that it's the wrong relationship? Like, how do you decipher that? Because sometimes it is just like, "Oh, this person
Mhm.
has a very reasonable flaw that I just
Yep.
don't like," or
Yep.
it's the wrong thing.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's either. I would say if
Mm.
you're feeling indecisive, there's something for you to learn. It could be that it is that you need to leave and you're in the wrong relationship. Or it could be that it is hitting something of yours that you need to like look at. And I think one of the ways to start looking at it is really taking stock of your patterns and your past. Are you someone who, at the first sign of someone doing something that you don't like, you leave?
I love this advice. Yeah.
Then you should probably stay for a
Yeah.
little bit, at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
Are you someone who always stays and you really struggle to leave people in relationships? Then that might be right. It might be that it is time for you to move forward and this is like really important. I think looking at your history, looking at your dating history, or even like your family history too, even your attachment and stuff like that with other people can be really illuminating. As a therapist, my general advice is taking kind of opposite action of what our instinct is, because a lot of times our instinct is anxiety, and or a lot of times we'll ping pong from one extreme to the other and trying to find that
Yes.
middle
I see
ground.
that with a lot of my clients and with my friends, and I even did that myself. This, like, but I think it is kind of part of the journey. I think you do
Yes,
have to feel the other extreme out before you find
totally.
the middle of the road, whatever that is for you. And I
Yes.
definitely did the opposite action thing, and that worked really well for me in my current relationship. Like, in the beginning when I felt like running, I did not.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
really glad I stayed because
Yeah.
I'm married now.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that looking at your history, that's where I think knowing yourself is so
Yeah.
important. And that's why just taking everything at face value on social media doesn't work, because it's not taking into account your history.
Amazing, amazing advice. So, speaking of indecision, you do have an incredible Substack that I pay for and I love. It's called
You're
Fence
so sweet.
Sitter. No, I seriously like this is I like I'm in this right now, right?
Yeah.
So, Fence Sitter listeners is all about deciding whether or not to have kids, which is so hard in 2024. Oh my God.
Yes.
And I definitely have been grappling with this all year. And
Mhm.
can I just tell
Yeah.
you what I've been thinking?
Tell me everything.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so, like, I got married in September, and we don't know if we want kids. We
Yeah.
mutually don't know.
Yeah.
We talk about it a lot. This is
Mhm.
not a conversation we avoid. I think we both like the idea of it, but,
Mhm.
like, I am terrified of the career setback, like, that's
Mhm.
up and coming. He has said he doesn't know what he'll look forward to as a parent. Like, he
Mhm.
can't think of, like, a
Mhm.
specific thing about, like, the baby part that he'll like.
Yeah.
And, we decided we made a
Mhm.
decision to not make a decision
Yeah.
until next year,
Yeah. I think that's a great idea.
and that is where we landed so far.
I mean, I think that's a great thing to do. That is often what I help people do as the first step, is
Okay.
that I think people want to be able to plan it out and they feel like there's something wrong if they don't know right now and they want to make the decision now, but choosing to wait to make the decision is making a decision that can help you feel calm in the meantime. And I
Yeah.
think one thing I see that's very frustrating to me is there is a lot of pressure sometimes online of like, make a decision right now. You need to get off the fence.
Yeah.
And I think that there is power in sitting on the fence. There is power in being in that indecisive place. Obviously, if you're like racking your brain about it and super miserable, this is where you guys saying we're going to wait is
Yeah.
helpful.
I needed that because I just
Yeah.
have had so much anxiety. I'm like, "Oh my god, like, I need to make as much money as I can before
Mm.
I even think about getting pregnant because I'm not be able to work. I'm gonna be the one staying at home." And I will like,
Yeah.
I do want that. Like, that is
Yeah.
something I actually want if we choose to do it, but it's like, it is this pressure, and I think delaying the decision has helped relieve the pressure. And
Mhm.
recently, like, even, like, in even this past weekend, honestly, I've been
Yeah.
thinking about how I don't have to have kids by 35. I
No,
do
you
not I
don't.
can wait a little bit longer. My husband wants to have kids before he's 40,
Yeah.
so that gives us, like, a 6-year window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. I think too, maybe thinking about is there a certain experience or way you guys would want to have kids that would
Mm.
make you interested in having kids? Because I think we often have these like ideas of how parenting will be based on our families, our friends, what we see. And I think reminding yourself that and maybe it is that you guys say like or like you kind of said, I want to stay home. I want to be able to do that if I have kids and that's my ideal scenario. But I would also remember that there are different ways
Right.
to have kids too.
Yeah, I wasn't brought up that way, right?
Mhm.
Like, and I don't think yeah, my husband wasn't either, but it's just like it does feel impossible. Like, we live in California, we live next to one of the most expensive zip codes in the
Yeah.
country, and it feels like I have friends who are working at Google who won't be able to buy a house even with
Yeah.
parental help. Like, that's,
Yeah.
like, the highest paid tech jobs with parental help, like,
Yes.
can't buy a house, and that's, like, kind of
Yes.
where the environment and the bubble I'm in right now,
Mhm.
and it just makes it even harder. So, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Were you a fence sitter? Because you have a
I
daughter, right?
was.
Okay.
Yes, that is why I'm so passionate about this topic, and I truly feel like nobody was talking about it, and I started talking about it because I was like, "I wanna talk about
Yeah.
it."
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was your journey like?
Yeah, so mine was kind of similar to yours in terms of my husband and I both didn't know. He was a little more in the pro camp of wanting to have children, I think, than me. I was very undecided, very unsure. And we were very passionate about, we did, like, for me, I think what's so interesting is I was very like, marriage and kids are very separate. And I would get very frustrated when I would see people like immediately get pregnant because I would be like, these are 2 different things. How are you just
Yeah.
lumping them,
Oh my gosh.
together?
Right.
Which in retrospect, looking back, I was like, clearly I was very triggered and
Yeah.
frustrated at people
It's more
moving
about
t
you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we also had a similar thing of we kind of were like, we're gonna take the next couple years and be married, and then we'll sort of figure it out. And it was really hard for me because we got married right before COVID hit. So we had all of these plans to travel. We had this like big bucket list that we wanted to do before we had kids, and we really felt like we lost that.
Mm.
And my mom really struggled to have kids. It took her a few years. So I had in like the background of my head, like I felt a lot of pressure because I felt like it's going to definitely be really hard for me to have kids. So
Same, for the same reason.
yeah,
Yeah.
so like I have to do it. So yeah, I mean, what I ended up, I worked with a therapist who was wonderful. And I really kind of realized that I had a huge fear of becoming like my mom. And she really struggled with giving up her career and that transition. And she gave up her career for my dad essentially. And we moved across the country. And my career is also extremely important to me. And I could never imagine myself staying home. And I really struggled with sort of that idea. And I worked with a therapist to kind of help me unpack that. And I also want to say for anyone who's listening, I think a lot of times when people or therapists talk about like fear, I think there's this like idea that you have to face your fear. You have to, once you find out that you're afraid of something, it means you must do it. And
Not a great
I,
reason to have kids, honestly, I don't
yes,
know.
I don't agree with that. I think you can be afraid of having kids and not want kids. I think you can be afraid of having kids and
And
want kids and face it. I think you can, be any variety of those things. What really matters, I think, is understanding the difference between fear, desire, and like logistics or barriers that are holding you back. And if you can tease apart those three, it will at least help you understand where you're coming from. Like I don't care what anyone's decision, what they choose to do, obviously. But what I think is helpful is for people to at least understand the like invisible forces that might be influencing their decisions so that they can be cognizant of how that's influencing them, and then they have more power and choice.
Yeah, I read your subtext about the fear, barriers, and desire. So, can you talk a little bit more about how you tease these apart? What is the thought exercise that you do?
Yeah. Yeah, I think they really part of it is really, thinking through, and I do this work with clients sometimes of I have them think about because a lot of times when you're trying to decide if you wanna have kids, you're like, "I don't know if I wanna have kids because I don't know if it's gonna impact my career, and I only wanna have kids if I know that it's not gonna impact my career," which makes finding out if you genuinely want to have children or not hard when it hinges upon these other things, right? So to be able to tease them apart, it doesn't mean you don't let them influence you
Mhm.
because we do live in a world where, being able to afford a house or, daycare or things like that are very real and will 100% impact your experience as a parent. But I think really, even if you write it down on a piece of paper or you think about it for yourself, really thinking through what are the barriers for me of having kids, or logistics, right? It could be money, it could be issues with career, it could be lack of parental, your own support system,
Mhm.
it could be where you live, any of those things. Then fears, whether it's fear of birth, fear of, the world we live in, fear of climate change, any of those things. And really thinking about all of those fears. And then asking yourself, okay, if I set those two things aside, if I pretended for a moment that I knew that those things would be okay, that my fears wouldn't come true, that the logistics may not go away, but I could work through them, would I want to have children?
Right.
And really trying to sit in that. And it's a hard exercise to do because those things kind of keep creeping back in and we have to keep pushing them to the side. And literally, you have to kind of do the thought exercise of imagining yourself free
It's
of
so
these
hard. I've
logistics.
tried it. It's so
Yeah.
hard. Like, I can definitely see it. It's like, oh, I see it. I can see us really enjoying it, but then it's like, oh my god, I can see it also. You just hear so many
Yeah.
stories. Like, back to the social media thing,
Yeah.
something I really struggle with is, like, I'll be scrolling through TikTok, and I'm not I'm on baby talk, okay? I'm on,
Yep.
like, pregnant
Yeah.
talk. Like, I'm on all these, I, like, that like, the algorithm knows something about this, and all I see is just, like, videos of moms, like, crying in their cars and, like, saying how
Yes.
hard it is, and just like, "Oh my god, like, I don't want that."
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just, like, hard to remember, like we were saying earlier, that that's not the reality for everyone. There are plenty of parents who are enjoying it. Like, that's also just one moment of their day that's dramatic,
Mhm.
It's also the algorithm feeding me more of this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
it is hard to remember
Yeah.
that.
It's really, really hard, and I remember being where you are with that too, and being so frustrated and feeling often like, "Why does anyone even have kids? Like, I don't get it." It's really hard, and I think that yeah, I think trying to imagine that it's a moment and it's a whole person's life, a whole day, and all you're seeing is one moment. And a lot of times, like, the really sweet moments with your child aren't really published on social media
Yeah.
either. And even more so, this is what I think is so hard to describe as a parent now. I can say, like, a lot of my favorite things about being a parent, like, are not really, like, logical or Instagrammable, and they don't make sense if you don't have a kid. Like, if I told myself a couple years ago, like, "You're gonna have the best day because your child, like, made a weird noise." Like, it doesn't make sense. I would have told myself, like, "What? Like, what are you talking about?"
That's
But
sweet.
it's, like, in the context of your life, it is just I just firmly believe what's so hard about trying to imagine having kids is, like, people just say, "Oh, but it's I love my child so much, so it's so worth it."
Mhm.
But you can't imagine how much you love your child until you have them. You can't I fully didn't ever I remember hearing parents talk about how they would, like, die for their children, and I was like, "I'm never gonna feel that way." Like, that makes no sense.
It's so sweet. I love hearing you talk about this. It makes me tear up because I think it's really amazing. And I was telling my husband yesterday, like, I was like, I love my dog so much. Like,
Yeah.
a child is gonna ruin me. Like, I love my dog so much, but like
Yeah.
having a kid will just, I don't even know.
Ruin you in what way, Talia?
Like, well, like what you're saying is like it's gonna be
Yeah.
a completely different level of love,
Yeah.
like unlocked.
Yeah.
And I just know that that would be coming if we decide to. But I also think
Yeah.
I also can see a life where we don't. That's the thing. Like I
Yeah.
also can see like, we could be great on uncle, his sister's
Yeah.
pregnant, like all kinds of stuff like that. But back to what you were saying earlier about you and your
Mhm.
husband before you had your daughter, like and when you were dating even, what do
Mhm.
you think about going into a marriage and not knowing? Because I get a lot of
Mm.
pushback for this. People are like, "You
Hmm.
can't you got married and you didn't know? What?" Like, and it's like, "Are you supposed to
I mean
wait?" Like, I don't know.
I think the reality is too that, like, not everyone knows. Like, clearly it worked out with you and your husband. Like, I think
But,
people
like,
have an
we can't say that yet because what if it doesn't? That's the fear. It's like, what
that
if you get to that point and
yeah.
someone wants kids and the other
Yeah.
person doesn't? So, yeah,
Yeah.
how did you think through that?
I think one of the things to remember is that people can change their mind at any point also.
Right.
So
Right.
obviously, like, yes, I'm not advocating for people to like trick people, right? Like into not saying they want kids if they want them or whatever. But I think as long as you're honest, I think a lot of people don't know. I also really push back on the idea that people either want kids or they don't want kids. I think there are many worlds where a lot of us could be happy with kids and without kids. And there are equally wonderful lives with both. And I'm sure people who are parents don't like me saying that because when you have a kid, you're supposed to like forget who you were before you were a parent, but I don't. I love my daughter. I don't regret it at all. I don't wish to reverse the decision whatsoever. And I still think I could have had a great life without a
Mhm.
child. And I think it's okay to feel that way. And I think a lot of people are more, of course, there are people who know and there are people that don't know. But just like there are people who probably could take or leave getting married, they could take or leave a certain job. Like there is, I think, a lot more of that. I just think socially, we haven't allowed for enough ambivalence and questioning that people are just starting to talk about this.
Right, and it's uncomfortable. The
Yeah.
ambivalence, like you were saying earlier, it feels better in our brains to have a decision and put that in a box, pack it up, and leave it alone. It's like, "I'm
Yeah.
done, did that." But, like, yeah, no, it's much more difficult, you're right, to be ambivalent, and I hope people listening, like, just you're normal if you're fine if you're
Yeah.
ambivalent. You don't need to figure it out right away. I'll probably listen to this in a couple of years and be like, "I still don't know." I don't know.
And I think too, like, I wish that I don't know, I think what's also hard sometimes is I think people who are parents or not parents are very into their lifestyle being kind of the right
Mm,
lifestyle. And I think non-parents, rightly so, right? They've probably in the world they live in are more anomalies or more rare. So they feel more defensive over their life, which I completely understand. And I think we need people saying your life can be great without kids. Um, but I think like parents, even it is even like, so I only have one child and I'm only going to have an only child. And I talk about that sometimes, and people get really upset about that and think that I need to have more. And I think that it's just crazy because it's social media, it's everything, but it's just like someone making a different decision than you doesn't invalidate your choices. And I think there's a
right.
weird thing with parenting because you've created this life that people feel like if I say that I could have had a great life without a child, I'm like wishing death on my child, which is not
No,
true.
yeah, that's not right.
But people like
Yeah.
lose their minds a little bit and they can't be
And saying
neutral
that
about
doesn't
it.
mean you don't love your kid.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so true. Amanda, this has been an amazing conversation. I am so glad we got into all these different topics, and I just wanna wrap it up by asking you,
Yeah.
what do you wanna see more of in dating culture?
I really want like more I have a podcast called Nuance Needed, so this probably isn't a surprise, but I just think we need more nuance. I think oh, you know what specifically with nuance I want? Did you watch I'm sure you watched the show Nobody Wants This? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that they talked about how you can get over icks. And
Yes.
I want more people to understand that you can have an ick, which is a temporary feeling, right? Which isn't permanent necessarily. And it does not doom your relationship either. And I think some of us, because we're so like nervous about dating or scared about the world right now or don't want to waste our time, we are so quick to jump to conclusions whether the person doesn't look like specifically how we want them to look or they do something slightly that we are turned off by. That doesn't mean that we should just totally write off the person. And I would
Yes,
love
thank
us
you for
to
saying that.
I had a very strong ick with my husband on my
What was
second
it?
date. He said the weirdest he it's not even weird. It was like the context. He was driving me somewhere and he said like, "Oh, I love my life." And I was like, "This guy's full of himself and this is gross."
What? I think that's so interesting that that was your initial reaction to that very positive
I know.
statement. It's like that very like,
I
"Oh, someone who
know.
loves their life, how unattractive."
I know. It was the way
Gross.
he said it. I was just like, "Ugh." I
Wait,
don't
how
know.
many
I
dates
had
in
such an
was
ick.
this? Like,
It was the second date.
that's actually really cute that he said that with you in the car as my reaction. That's so cute.
But it was like, I don't know, he almost seemed like too nice or something. And I think that's a thing sometimes for
Right.
women too, right? Is like we can get an ick over someone who seems too genuine, too nice, too authentic or whatever. So, yeah, that's what I want to see in
Did you
dating is
meet him after you had started your sobriety journey?
I did. I was 2 years sober.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just curious.
Yeah.
I agree. I definitely had icks with my husband as well. I mean, like, I'm trying to think of when I mean, he's look, this is one of his things is that he jokes around all the time.
Yeah.
So that's like kind of one of the things that you were saying earlier, like choosing your hard, choosing what you
Mhm.
want to deal with. It's like, okay, he's really funny and makes jokes all the time, but also he makes jokes all the time. So
That
like,
is gonna be
yeah, like
the trade-off you get for someone who's really
yep.
funny.
And I've had to learn, like, if once he gets out of his system, we can be serious and move on, and I can just let him do it, and it's fine. Like,
Yeah.
But to someone else might not be able to handle that. But
Yeah.
I
I
can
love that
apparently.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much again. Where can we find more of you?
Yes, you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok at Therapy for Women. And if you want to hear more nuanced takes, like you said, my podcast is called Nuance Needed.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.